a panel of people that I believe to be experts in their field, and we look at a particular topic that affects small businesses. And today we're looking at, do SMEs have their ducks in a row when it comes to legislation? So we've got quite a diversity in the panel today, all of whom have their fingers in various pies with small businesses that affect the legislative nature of running a business. So I'll let them introduce themselves first, and then we can crack on. So Nikki, do you want to let people know who you are?
Yes, certainly will. So good morning, everybody. I'm Nikki Buckley. I am the Managing Director and founder of East Midlands HR. We're based in Ecton in Northampton. And we partner business for people performance. So we work with SMEs to make sure they're remaining legal and compliant, either on a retained basis, ad hoc, or we really like some nice projects. They're really good and interesting work for us to do.
Fair enough.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you very much. Stephen.
Good morning, everybody. Stephen May there, solicitor and your business lawyer. I help small and medium-sized businesses with all of their legal problems, really. So my experience pretty wide and deep over the last 15 years of being a lawyer, and there's not really a problem that a small or medium-sized business could come across that I probably have not dealt with already. So yeah, happy to help and happy to input into this Focus On panel.
Excellent. And finally, Gail.
Thanks, Paul. Morning, everybody. My name's Gail Parker, and I'm a data protection specialist at DataSense. We provide expert advice on all things GDPR. We also cover cybersecurity, telecoms, and managed IT. And certainly come across quite a few businesses that haven't quite got all their ducks in a row when it comes to GDPR. So quite a relevant discussion, I think, this morning.
Okay, glad to hear it. So let me just hide that and put you full screen. So yeah, that is the topic. So let's start with you, Nikki, then. What are some of the things that you find in your HR world then, that the mistakes that sort of SMEs are making and whereby they haven't got their ducks in a row, to use the...
So I'm going to start with the very beginning with the recruitment. Even just placing an advert, sometimes they can get that so wrong by putting things on that are discriminatory. So that can obviously affect people applying for the job, because they might think, oh, I don't want to work there, but also you're run the risk of being taken to tribunal before you've even hired anybody. So I think that's always a good place to start, and to make sure that the adverts that you put out and where they connect to and how you post things are always looked at fully. And then I suppose going the next stage would be the contracts. Contracts has been quite a big one that I'm finding people haven't changed. There was some legislation changes in April 2020 for requirements, what needed to be in a contract of employment. And they're the main things I'm finding that people haven't updated those at all.
And do you find that in some of the clients that you start to work, they actually haven't got contracts at all?
Yep. Yeah, we've had that. I've been contacted. I thought, oh, you've had not got contracts at all. So yeah, we've got them sorted out. And again, contracts change. You need to issue them from day one, if not before. So this is where use of software, so e-sign software really comes into its own. It makes it really easy for SMEs and myself to get contracts out. And it's also key part of the onboarding process. Is the quicker you can get your paperwork out, the more likely you are to get that person to start. Because as we all know, it is, I think what the news today was, there's more vacancies than there are in unemployed people. So you've got to, if you are recruiting, you've got to be quick. You've got to get all your paperwork all sorted. But also, that person's not guaranteed to start even until they've actually started on day one.
Yeah, it's an interesting time at the moment.
Yeah.
So Stephen, contracts.
I was going to just jump in there. And that's a kind of it's a typical and a really simple one, but a classic example of how business owners, particularly in the small business world, may feel like they're trying, but they can never keep up with legislation changes. So what always used to happen is, and plenty of businesses still do this, is they would send their employee an offer letter, and their offer letter set out some basic terms like, we're going to pay you this much, you might get some holidays. But then they probably didn't get round to doing a contract of employment or statement of terms for a few months. We'll let the probation period run out first, because we, just in case we see how we get on, if we like you, if you're any good, and then we'll give you a contract. That's what's happened, for the last, as long as I know. But as Nikki said, now from last year, from day zero, as soon as they start, day zero, day one, whichever, they've got to have in their hands a statement of terms, a contract of employment. setting out a requirement of a plethora of terms that need to happen. And so it's important that businesses stay up to date, because things go out of date really quickly, and that for me is a real key point. And that can only really come from having great support and advice around you. Using people like Nikki in an organisation to go, oh, here's some updates. Because if you're not looking for it as a small business owner, if you're not actually going and looking, oh, what's the latest update, you'll miss it. But we're paid to make sure that we don't miss those things.
And is it? Do you think is it an ignorance or an apathy or a combination of both that some of those things aren't in place?
No, I don't think it is. Because I don't speak to many employers that or many small businesses that don't want to get their ducks in a row. Mm-hmm. It's just that there's too much of it. So if we take employment law, for instance, the quote that I've made a career out of, but what I always say is clients always come to me and say employment law is a minefield. And the raft of all the other legislation that we can talk about as well, and things that impact on small business, it's a minefield. And small businesses are often created by people that were just good at their job, or like their job, and they go, do you know what, I'm going to do this for myself. And then they start doing it for themselves, and they start taking on staff and do this and do that. And you have, a classic worker kind of manager owner of the business, and they just want to carry on doing the job. They might now do some more management, or they might do some BD or whatever it might be, but actually staying in front of the legislation on top of it is not what they were trained to do. It's not their forte. It's not what they're set up to do. So I don't think it's apathy or anything like that. I think it's just that they're running a business. It's fair enough. They've got a business to run. They've got clients, customers to please, staff to look after, work to do, the quality issue, all of those things in running a business. And so something always takes a back row seat. And the most, for me, a quote in Rich Dad Poor Dad, actually, it was about the value of having great advisors around you. And there's another quote as well of having if you're in business, having a room full of people smarter than you are, in running a business. And that's what it is. And that doesn't mean you have to have all of that knowledge and expertise in house by employing people, because you can get somebody like one of the people on this call, and there's a little bit of a cost, but then we make sure that you're compliant. And that's what you really want. It's much better to be compliant, because there's lots of consequences.
Funny enough, Stephen, whatever room I seem to be in, people seem to be smarter than me. So to anybody sort of listening to this or live or watching on the replay, if you do have questions or comments that you want to make for the panelists, then you can put that on whatever social media platform you're on, and we should be able to see that and address it accordingly. So Gail, you're in the GDPR world. I guess there's a lot of misunderstanding and potential confusion about that. Well, what do you see out there in terms of people trying to get their GDPR ducks in a row?
Yeah, I think a very similar story, actually, because obviously there's a lot of hype back in 2018 when GDPR became law, and a lot of running around trying to get their ducks in a row. And then I think most small businesses pretty much forgot about it after that. And one of the things I come across all the time is people saying, well, I did my privacy policy, nearly 4 years ago now. But businesses change. Businesses change quite rapidly over the course of even a year. And just sort of take the point that Nikki was making about new staff, there is a requirement under GDPR law for each new staff member to be trained in GDPR, but most companies don't know that. The other thing that most companies don't know is that they need to register with the ICO if they process data. Again, I think it comes back down to you just don't know what you don't know. As Stephen was sort of alluding to, they just want to get on with the job, the day-to-day job. And there are so many other things out there that they have to be mindful of. And it's, I think, sessions like this that raise the awareness of these types of issues. And
do you think, Gail, that a lot of companies just wing it, even though they possibly know they haven't got these things in place, that they think, well, okay, I'm unlikely to get caught. So is that your experience, that they think they'll get away with it so they don't have to do anything right now?
Yeah, I can pretty much split an audience in half. Whenever I'm doing a presentation, half of them will know they're not doing everything they need to, but it's not the highest priority on their list. unless they get caught, they're not too fussed about it. And then the other half really much don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So I think, yeah, absolutely. And a business will have different priorities on a day-to-day basis, and the one that's shouting loudest will usually get the most attention. But I think people don't realise. I mean, I quite often get people coming up to me. They've been written to by the ICO. They've got a letter saying, "Why haven't you registered with them?" And that's when they'll come to me, rather than preempting that and getting everything lined up before that letter arrives.
And it's probably worth pointing out that it's a fairly easy process to register with the ICO, and it's what's it now, £35 a year or something like that. It's not.
Yeah, £35 for direct debit, and it takes 10 minutes literally online, and it will tell you whether or not you need to register as well as you go through the process.
Yeah, it's quite straightforward, and I found that I did it years ago, because I'm very clear in the nature of my business that I'm handling data, and I guess it's just sort of one rung on the ladder to a level of protection, just to let people know that I have gone through the process and I am managing data. So yeah, I think it's worth every business doing that, because I'm sure every single business is managing and keeping data in some way. Stephen, you've got to.
It's something. It's one of those things. I had a client that had a data protection issue, shall we say, and they went, "Oh no, because I've registered with the ICO." And
oh yes, it's just
and you go, "Well, okay, but did you do?" And that's the problem. So like Gail's right with GDPR. Like it was madness, and everyone was kind of, "Oh, we've got to do something, and we've got to send somebody on a course, do a webinar and do that, right?" And that's great, right? But it's an ongoing thing, and people, in my experience, businesses are even the ones that think they're doing GDPR well aren't. And it's
even some of the big companies as well are not doing it brilliantly. So.
Exactly. And I had a guy the other day. There's a very minor data protection breach, and so he says, "What do I do?" And so I diverted him to the ICO website. There's a self-assessment report, pretty much always for small minor breaches. It's going to turn around and say, put it in a data log, put it in a log and record it. You do have one of those, don't you? No. and that's it. So it's from a small business point of view, there is just so much in each sector, in each area, to stay on top of and keep abreast of, that it is nigh on impossible in my book to be able to do it unless you have the experience and you're qualified, like the people on this call, apart from Paul, or you use experts, and that is for me the bottom line. If you're in a small business, look, I know if you're a freelancer, you're just starting up, putting in place a data protection policy, and actually doing a GDPR kind of audit of what data you're going to be holding and all of that kind of thing is probably not something you're going to want to spend some money on right now, because you're more interested in getting the work in. But each one of these steps, it's really important. Getting employees right, getting data protection right, or getting one of the other 10 things that I've made another list of, as I did in the previous one.
James has tuned in, James Blackclaws, and just asked, what percentage of small business owners do you think don't have ICO registration when they should have? I don't know whether any of you know the stats on that. I'd imagine it's quite a high percentage.
It is, yeah. The last stat I read was that over a third of businesses still haven't registered that should have done. I think it's probably nearer 50% of businesses, because I still speak to businesses on a almost daily basis. Well, I don't need to register. I don't process data. And then when I say, well, do you have customers? Do you have employees? Yes. And so I think, again, it's just that you don't know that what you don't know again. Yeah,
very true. Very true. So, Nikki, anything else that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I should say, going still with the recruitment, the right to work, that's another thing that normally pops up with the or any audits that I do, is whether they can show that they've been signed and dated and the copies are clear and all this, and where they've got them stored on bits of paper or scanned, and if they're on a secure file. But also with different changes, with doing virtual checks, and then going back to I think it's November, I'm going to have to check now, to the original documents, all that sort of things changes. Another big thing, again, where that document and who has access to that data as well. Again, that's why I would say HR systems come into their own, because it means it can all be securely stored. Tick Gail's box for the data protection as well, and limit the access of who can go on there. So I think there is lots of things that people can do to prevent things, but it's making them aware that they've got to have things in place in the first instance.
Yeah, and even something like that with storing HR information, you've got things like sick pay, disabilities, ethnicity, and these are all special category data, which again needs to be more looking after than your sort of regular personal data. And again, a lot of people don't know that. And
vaccine status was one recently. Oh, we're going to start asking people if they're vaccinated. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Where's your policy for that? What do you mean? That's
But
sensitive
need,
medical personal data you're going to hold. Yeah.
And you need an appropriate policy document in place if you're going to process anything like that as well. Again, who's heard of an appropriate policy document? Apart from me, maybe.
Yeah.
Exactly. Fortunately, I have as well. I mentioned the quote. I didn't follow it up. So, employment law is a minefield. All area of law, if someone is an SMA, they're affected by it. It's a minefield, but you can navigate minefields, and that's the thing. Like if you've got the right, if you had a minefield with a map of where the mines were, you would be able to walk through that field no problem. And that's the key. If you're trying to do it blindly and just guessing where the mines are, then you might get blown up and lose a leg.
Yeah, Neil's just made a comment. You know, he's a small business. I think he's been in business just is it a couple of years? Yeah, I know he's
2 years. Yeah.
During lockdown, and of course, you know, he's in the financial world as well. So he's got all the other additional legislation that goes with that. So yeah, he's commented there and also been quite kind to sort of say that, you know, being part of a community like this can help raise awareness and make sure that people, you know, are trying to keep on track with the legislative needs. So terms and conditions, Stephen, you're a bit of an expert on that. What's the legalities around companies having terms and conditions? Do they have to?
No. So no requirement for them to have terms and conditions in place at all. Particularly if you're doing business to business trading, it's fine. You can do whatever. Why you would is beyond me, because it means then all you're relying on is, you know, an email or a handshake, you know, a verbal agreement, something along those lines. It's to document what was actually agreed. But terms and conditions are really important. Particularly if you're dealing with consumers. So there are, and although terms and conditions aren't necessarily a requirement, if you're dealing with consumers, you have to provide them with certain information. And that's why we would normally do that in terms and conditions. So if we're dealing with consumers, we've got to tell them the Consumer Rights Act applies, and the regulations set out what they can and can't do, or what you can and can't do, and what you've got to be able to offer them. Depends on if you're offering them goods or services, if they're digital goods, etc. But you know, they have a right to request a refund if they're unhappy, a right to request a repair if the problem can be repaired, etc. And so there are definitely certain amounts of information that businesses need to do. If you're dealing with things online, remotely, and you're not seeing somebody, they're not coming into your office, then that's a distance selling contract. So again, some other terms apply, some other legislation applies there. Basically, they get a 14-day cooling off period from entering into the contract. So that's it's something that's really important. I had a case once involving a builder, and the builder was doing work, and the next door neighbor said, "Oh, can you come round to mine and give me a quote?" "Yeah, sure, I'll pop round." Gave them a quote, and they said, "Can you start?" So they said, "Yeah, start doing the work." But that was a what's called a doorstep contract, and it's not at your premises; it's an off-premises contract. So they get a cancellation period, and because the law says because they didn't give them the notice required that says they have a 14-day cancellation period, or the ability to waive the 14-day period because I want the work doing on an emergency basis, then technically they don't need to pay, and that's a bit of that's a really difficult one if you're a builder having done some work, you didn't do what the law says you should do. And again, so things like that. I noticed I was doing something recently, sending out some Christmas cards actually, and looking at people's websites for addresses. And I would say as much as 50% of the businesses that I looked at didn't have the required information on their website. So again, there's regulations that say if you're operating a website, you need to identify who the legal operator is, the entity, the company name, etc., and an address for contact. And so many people aren't putting that information on. then it's a lot of them definitely missing off whether or not they're a company or not a company. And again, it's things like that.
Is that just for limited companies, Stephen? Or
No, anyone running a website. If you're running a website for business purposes,
yep.
You've got to identify who the legal operator of that website is. So if it's you, Paul, you've got to write, business community. It's Paul Green trading as the business community. Yeah. And like me, my website has my limited company details on the bottom there because it's a limited company. I know you can add that into terms and conditions kinds of page on the website, or you can have it on the footer on every page or whatever. But it's still a requirement to put on a website. Websites, of course, they have loads more requirements like cookies, which links into GDPR and things like that. But again, people are they doing it properly? No, probably not. They've got an idea that they've got to have a pop-up banner saying, do you accept cookies? And that's, I'll do that then. But actually, are they giving it any thought about what requires is a different question.
Yeah, certainly the cookies and the privacy policies, most people either borrow one from somebody else or they use the sort of standard one that comes with a plug type website. And of course, it doesn't say what it should do because it doesn't cover everything they need to. And if you're collecting any sort of data on a website, you've got to have your privacy policy at the point of data collection. And again, people don't do that. One of the things I wanted to mention was Ring doorbells, because something that a lot of people have now are these Ring doorbells at their front doors, and quite often in business premises as well. And Ring doorbells are covered by GDPR. And in fact, one case recently saw a private citizen, which generally isn't covered by GDPR rules, fined £100,000 for having their Ring doorbell spying on their neighbour. It's something to look out for. So if you've got Ring doorbells, particularly in your business, you need to have the right documentation in place. You need a recording policy. You also need to register with the CCTV with the ICO. So again, something as innocuous as a Ring doorbell can also trip you up.
Stop stalking your neighbours.
Yeah.
So James Blacklaws has asked a question about what puts business owners off having proper terms and conditions in place.
I think the answer to that question is the same thing that puts business owners doing anything. It's the same thing that puts me off going to the gym. I know it's really good for me, but honestly, I've got better things to do with life. And that's the same.
How did you get a body like that then, Stephen?
Oh, this is a filter. It's fine. That's how I do everything online. It's amazing. I know. I look 21 and incredibly handsome. I get it. Stop going on about it, Paul. No, look. I think businesses perhaps think that things like that costs a lot of money. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, they don't, and it's a cost saving. But as I say, I appreciate that. If you're a new startup and that you're looking at, coming to someone like me or one of the other people that provide, documentation and terms and stuff like that, and the other people on the call, and you say, right, I want to be completely fully compliant. I'm starting up in business. I want to be completely fully compliant. I want to make sure that I've got a shareholders agreement in place. I've got a will in place. I've got my terms and conditions in place. I've got my GDPR all sorted. I've got my employment stuff all sorted. I've got any kind of marketing materials all sorted. Any regulatory stuff. So it's going to cost you quite a bit of money. Yeah, but there are cheaper alternatives that are available. I know there's another member in the business community that's just launched BEB Consultancy. They've just launched a website for startups, and I think some small business academy or something like that it was called, which people can go on for a very low cost and get information and get guides and help and support on things like that. So there's plenty of businesses out there that are changing the way of delivery of this, but it's just a matter of small businesses going out there and saying, yeah, do you know what? I need some help. And terms and conditions, even if you got an incredibly expensive lawyer like me to draft them, it's going to cost you a few £100. It's not going to be something that is, several thousands of pounds. It's but really important to have them in place. But it's just, I think the reasons why small businesses don't do it is because it's one of many things that they need to get around to doing.
Is that the same for you, Nikki? Do they think there's going to be an immense cost to sort of putting all their HR ducks in a row?
Yeah, I believe so. I think if I said like HR system, people think that's really expensive. But I mean, I partner with the HR system I use, and it's really affordable. And if it's going to save you, we believe on average 30% of the people admin time, then it's kind of a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you have an HR system? Why wouldn't you have people trained to use it? It's really quite an intuitive system. You can set up reminders such as your right to work if there is ones you need to check and things, so that you know you're not going to miss things, or we can do that for you. It's just working with SMEs to understand what's going to be the best way for them that's an affordable solution, so that they can sleep at night and not have the worry of, oh, hang on, I've not done this, I've not done that. Our HMRC going to turn up and want to check all my right to work documents and I've not got them. And then it's a £20,000 fine. So do you pay something now or have the fines?
Yeah, I was going to come on to that. You know, what are the potential fines or costs of being found out? So you just sort of shared that. And there's what are the fines in the GDPR world, Gail, for not being compliant?
Yeah, so it can be up to 4% of your yearly turnover. And the sort of irony is, if you haven't got your ducks in a row beforehand, you can get fined twice. So you can, let's say you have a data breach, you can get fined for the data breach and you can get fined for being non-compliant as well. So even if you do have something that went wrong, you might have a much smaller fine if you had got everything else in the background correct. But they say 4%, and I think they've recently fined, I think it was Facebook, about £4 million, which to me isn't 4% of their yearly turnover. So I'm not quite sure how they calculated that. But they have fined small businesses. I've known a business in the Northamptonshire area that's been fined £6,000 for breaches. So it's not insignificant.
Mm-mm. And people are just sort of playing the lottery, aren't they, if they're not getting those things in place. Anything else on your list, Stephen? I know you do a top 10 for these sessions.
I do, yeah. You know, fail to prepare and all that. I mean, if you take, just going back on that other subject, the consequences of not making sure that you're compliant with stuff. Take health and safety as an example. We don't have somebody here doing health and safety, but it's a massive area in which people kind of pay lip service to, because they think it puts hurdles in the way of them doing the job that they want to do and just want to crack on with stuff rather than making sure that things are safe and people aren't dying. But the consequences of not following that through and not doing a proper health and safety, not having all your health and safety things lined up, is potentially imprisonment. You potentially go to prison for manslaughter because somebody died. And it's like, well, that's a major thing. Your company will go bust because they'll fine you a massive amount of money as well. But like ending up in prison is pretty severe. And so again, it's the consequences of making sure that things are in place. What are the things that I've got on my list? We've covered most of them. So if you're a company, you've got duties and legislative duties under the Companies Act. Most companies don't realise that because they've never looked at the Companies Act 2006, but it sets out a whole raft of what your duties are, what the companies can and can't do as a director. And one of the things that is very common but people don't realise is that as a director you can still be liable for the debts of the company. Most people think if you've got a limited liability company that you're protected. That I'm not, as an individual, liable for the for what's gone on in the company. So if something massive happens, the company will just close, go bust, and I can escape scot-free. Limited liability is for the shareholders of the business. So what that means is that as a shareholder, I might own £100 worth of shares. My liability to pay anything extra over and above that is limited to £100. But as a director, you have duties set out in the Companies Act, and if you fundamentally breach them, then you could be held liable, particularly on a liquidation or a winding up of the business. Classic example that I've seen a number of times is things like non-payment of tax. So companies that are struggling often don't pay HMRC, all right? Don't pay the tax man, and then they get wound up and they kind of think, oh, I've got away with not paying the tax man. That was good. But you haven't, because the company law duties are that you've got to pay the tax man, and surprisingly, and so they'll say that was a breach of your Company Act duties, As a director, you should have done that. As a director, that's caused the business a loss, and therefore we're going to recover that from you. And there's been court cases that support that. And I don't know, insolvency practitioners pursue that as a really easy claim to bring against a director. So again, it's kind of making sure that, you know, as a director, you're aware of what your duties are as well in legislation. The other couple of points that I've got, so advertising and marketing, mostly advertising. There's quite a lot of law about advertising, whether or not that's on TV, radio, internet, that kind of thing. It's all governed by a variety of different organisations, but you can't say stuff that's misleading in advertising or marketing. You can't say stuff that's dishonest and or offensive and things like that. Most people are okay on that because it's kind of a common sense thing. But you know, people do get stung if you have a look. Even like Adidas, you know, showing a picture online recently of naked breasts. They got fined and the advert got pulled, and it's caused them, you know, problems because just the way it is. The final one that I've got on my list, and I've seen this quite a bit, where small businesses are dealing with large businesses, like multinational businesses, and they require a whole suite of documentation to be put in place, or for the company to have. Things like anti-bribery, anti-slavery policies, anti-corruption, those kind of standardized policies almost. And I had a number of businesses that have come to me saying, look, we're going to be working with this in a massive international organization. They require us to have all of these policies put in place. Can you help? And the answer is yes, of course.
Nice one. So somewhere that I found quite useful, and I know people do get benefit from in terms of finding affordable documentation to cover their arses, for want of a better expression, is the FSB website. So I don't know whether you guys are members of FSB, but they do have a legal hub. They have a legal helpline, and they also have quite a suite of documentation, which I think, you know, to start off with, if people are, you know, a little bit short, you know, there's some quite good stuff on there. And what are your thoughts around that, Nikki? I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm in the FSB, and I think it's a really good place to start. I think it's quite an affordable community to be in, and if you're getting the documents there to start off with, then you're right, there's a full suite of them covering anything from, there is employment stuff on there, there is health and safety things on there, is the business agreements on there. So I think it's a great place to start. There may be some adaptation that you're not sure what to do, and that's where people like myself, Gail and Stephen would be able to support those businesses. Yeah,
I think there's quite a few guides on there as well, as opposed to just the documentation that tells you what you should be doing as a small business. And I think for a one-man, one-woman band, I think it's like £149 a year or something. I think that's the current rate, which is, you know, not a lot of money for all the services they provide.
It's a bargain on the basis that you get access to a legal helpline. And if you think about what a lawyer, you know, typical lawyer would charge for something, and that for a year you get, you know, maybe 45 minutes, an hour with a lawyer. So it's a bargain to have. Gail mentioned a point which is it kind of cross references to what you're talking about. Using a site like FSB, I think is brilliant, and you know, can I happily recommend that kind of thing to people to do it. But just borrowing something from another website that, you know, maybe a competitor or somewhere that you saw online, not so good. Simply because I've had a number of clients then have snotty letters from lawyers saying that they're in breach of copyright because you've stolen one of my clients' X, Y, and Z policies from their internet. And they're dead easy cases to argue, because you go, hey, look, here's ours, there's yours. The only thing you changed was your name. And it's our copyright, and therefore we want 500 quid from you. And you try and argue against it, and you're going to lose, and they'll take you to court, and I've seen it, and you will lose. So yeah, don't just kind of borrow and think everything's fair in the internet world. You can just take whatever you want. It's not. Someone else's hard work. You can't steal it.
I've seen before that people haven't even been clever enough to change all the things in the terms of the
Yeah.
and it's still got reference to the old company, or address has nothing to do with them. So it's quite scary. So Gail, what are your thoughts on the FSB?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a member, so I can't really comment. Although I have been lucky enough to join some of the events recently. But my business partner is, and has been for 16 years, and I think he would very highly rate the support and the network, and also the sort of resources that he has access to there.
Yeah, so it's certainly a place to check out. If you're stuck with something, then give that a go. And then if you can't fathom that out, then come to some of you lovely people. So anything else before we wrap this up for today? Any sort of last bits of advice you've got for people, Nikki?
I was just thinking, one thing we've not touched, I saw, I think it was today, news about a claim that's or a payout for 38,000 for a pregnant lady, just because they've not followed they've not done risk assessments, they've not done the process, then they made her redundant, lots of things going on. So it had lots of flag up warnings all the way through it, but they're a small business, and they just thought they could do what they want. Well, unfortunately, you can't.
Mm-hmm. I still think there's some, some Alan Sugar style hire and fire 'em type bosses out there, not really following any of the guidelines at all. And I think people are getting a little bit more savvy now that they realise, they can go to a tribunal and can challenge what's happened to them. And I think I'm not sure what your experience is. That's happening more at the moment or less over the last 10 years.
I think my experience with tribunals is it's less in terms of what I've had to do for tribunals, but there's definitely more of the people do seem to rely on that. They've not been here for 2 years, I can just get rid of people. Well, that's not the case for disability discrimination, so that's where you've got to really be careful, because that will trip you up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, so employment law, it's a minefield unless you have a map. The best map to employment law is having good contracts and a handbook setting out policies of what you need to do. And then if they're properly written by somebody like Nikki, then you're going to say, okay, here's what we need to do. And as a business, as long as I follow each step and make a sensible decision and not one that's based upon bigotry or racism or something like that, then I'm going to be okay. Yeah, because the law says you can only have a claim against somebody if it's unfair, if the decision didn't follow a fair process, or if the decision was so unreasonable that no one else would make it. It's the only 2 times for unfair dismissal that you're going to make a claim. So as long as you follow a process, you're going to be all right. The claim that Nikki was mentioned, they kind of just make a hash of it because they just go do whatever. And I've plenty of clients, like you say, the Alan Sugar type people. Actually, not Alan Sugar, because I don't know anything about him. I don't want a defamation claim against me. He's a good guy. I like him. He's nice and he's got really deep pockets. But people that want to just hire and fire. I have plenty of clients that are like that, and I say to them, yeah, you can do, as long as you pay for it, and that's the bottom line. I can fire anybody. I can if you want to sack somebody that is on long-term disability, long-term sick leave because of a disability, then we can sack them. If you can sack somebody as easy as you want, but you just have to pay for it. And if you're prepared to do that, and we can avoid all tribunals, we can avoid all issues and everything like that. We just need to pay them off. And then some businesses go, yeah, okay. And some businesses go, oh, no, I don't know why I should pay them because they're not doing the job right. Oh, okay, then you're going to have an employment tribunal claim. So whichever one you want. There's the bottom line for me is this, and going back to the question, do SMEs have their ducks in line for legislation? No, probably not. Can they? Reasonably talking, probably not. It's very difficult. But using external support and advisors means that we're going to hold your hand and make sure that we're using and you're using the right map to get you through that minefield.
Gail, any last point from you?
And I really would just to echo what Stephen just said. It's better to get your ducks in a row beforehand rather than waiting for the fine, the prison sentence, or whatever it's going to be. A small investment upfront is a much better way to do it than waiting for the axe to fall.
Okay, thank you guys for joining me today. These go out at 11 o'clock every Tuesday. The next one is focused more on the strategy and personal development sort of area of business, and we're looking at, is a coach, mentor, or business advisor essential for a small business? So thanks if you've tuned into this either live or on the replay. That's pretty much it. So I'll let everybody go and end the call there.